I decided, in an effort to give the senator more time to get education that we need to know about what's going to happen in the future and to make us a group effort. Tell you a few things about the senator and let you fill in the blanks to what I don't know. Okay, the senator was born on September 17th, 1933, and he was elected to the Iowa legislature in 1958 and the House of Representatives, in 1974. Do you know what year he became senator? I do. You don't know. Anybody know? Okay, it was 1980. Then, on December 11th of 2014, Senator Grassley was appointed chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee for the 114th Congress. What is something that's unique to Senator Grassley compared to the other senators of the chairman? Okay, you got that one right. No. Since it's tax time, this is going to be somewhat tax related. The chairman of the Senate Committee with jurisdiction over taxes asked Senator to serve as a co-chairman of a group to make the tax code somewhat simpler and more fair. Do you think that that's going to possibly happen, they'll get the tax code any simpler?
I'm glad to answer your question. I'm very pessimistic. But it's so bad, we gotta try all the best we can.
The correct answer to any tax question is, it all depends. Okay, now, behind every successful man is a woman that helps him get there. Can anybody tell me the senator's wife's maiden name?
Spiker.
Barb.
She's got to be from New
Okay.
Hampton.
You know where she grew up?
Right on my coat.
Okay. You know what year they got married?
No. Before.
What year?
Before?
54. You know how many children they got?
How does she know?
5.
Next week's assignment, Jim Smith has prayer, the first on the project, and Ralph Smith. Without further ado, Dennis stole most of my thunder on the introduction, so please join me in welcoming Senator Grassley.
Some of you know more about me than I thought you would. Now it worries me what you might know or not know. Oh, my staff is reminding me here. We're going to pass out some cards. If you're interested in tax reform, you can fill them out and give them back to us. It helps us very much to know what direction you think we ought to go on tax reform, but that's your business. If you want to, all we can do is hand them out. First of all, I've got a few things that I want to say, but I want to put you at ease that for most of the part of this program is for you to ask me questions or communicate with me an opinion you have that you want me to hear rather than reading it in your email. And if you back it up with email, that's always better. And I'll count on you to say we got time for one more question, and then I'll know when to quit. Otherwise, I don't want my talk that much. So you think about the questions, and you might wonder what I'm at a Rotary Club, because most of the time I'm at your city hall for a town meeting, but I'll bet you darn few of you folks are able to come to my town meeting, so I try to go to, like I went to New Hampton to a factory floor this morning to answer questions for workers there. You here, then once in a while a high school. I don't have a high school on my agenda this particular week. But that's what I try to do because I get mostly retired people to come to my town meetings, so hopefully get a cross section. And if you wonder what I'm doing here instead of in Washington, generally I wouldn't want to say every holiday, but when we have a holiday, usually that week we know ahead of time, usually by Christmas, for the next year that we can hold town meetings. So that's what I plan on doing this stuff, maybe in the middle of January already. So I'll give you a little bit of update, probably more on process than I will on specific legislative issues. And the reason for process is I think there was a great deal of change in the United States Senate because there was irritation with the way Senator Reid was running the United States Senate as leader of the majority party then, the Democrats. So Republicans felt that we ought to make a big issue out of how the Senate isn't performing the way the Constitution intended, to be a deliberative body, to be a body that any member could offer amendments, and would be different than the House of Representatives, because in the House of Representatives, majority party, whether it's Republican or Democrat, can ignore the minority as long as they stick together. Whereas in the United States Senate, when it takes 60 votes to get something done, and you have, like last time, 55 Democrats, this time 54 Republicans, it's a place where you build consensus, because you can't ever get to 60 votes without having people of both political parties, or at least a few of at least another party being involved in the process. So that's what we did, and I want to give you a couple figures for previously and then a couple figures for now. Over the last Congress, the House passed 370 bills that weren't even considered in the United States Senate. The Senate very seldom met on Fridays during the last 2 or 3 years. There were only 18 roll call votes on amendments all last 12 months. This year, we haven't had many bills from the House of Representatives, but the 2 or 3 bills we have had from the House of Representatives have been up for debate. 3 of them have passed so far. Well, that'd be 3 up. There must have been 4 up because 1 hasn't passed yet. At least 3 of them have gone to the President. 2 of them signed by the President. The XL pipeline bill will be vetoed by the President. We won't be able to override the veto, so that may be the end of that. But we'll try other ways. But anyway, House bills coming over are considered and passed. That doesn't mean every House bill is going to pass the United States Senate. It doesn't even mean that every bill that the House of Representatives passes might not even be brought up in the United States Senate. But just to say no to every House bill is not the way the Senate should operate. Then the other, see, if I said this already, correct me. We had 18 roll call votes on amendments last year. This year, we've had 43 roll call votes on amendments, and 27 of those 43 roll call votes were Democrats amendments. So the whole idea behind the United States Senate and a supermajority of 60 is to build consensus, reasonably bipartisan consensus, so you can move ahead and get to finality. And that's what we feel like we have got the Senate back to what they were doing for 230 years prior to Reid running the Senate. I wouldn't want to say in 230 years that I know exactly how the Senate operated some of those times, but it's my understanding that it's been very much a deliberative body where the minority could hold things up. The only place where minority views are protected in the United States Senate, no place else in our governmental system. So you build consensus and bipartisanship, and that's what we're trying to do. So the bills that we have passed so far, if you're a property and casualty person, you had your National Association tell you about the necessity for getting terrorist insurance passed. We passed a bill on child pornography to overturn the Supreme Court decision that we felt was detrimental to protecting children. We passed the XL pipeline bill, and presently we're on the bill that deals with trying to override the president's what he did by executive action on immigration, because we feel he acted in a non-constitutional way. Now, I don't know that we'll be able to do it, but we gotta try to do it, because that was one of the big issues of the campaign as well. If we don't do it, then changes will have to become through general immigration legislation that will come up later this year. And then for me, being chairman of the Judiciary Committee, that child pornography bill was one of them. Next week, we'll be working on a bill with human trafficking, and a lot of that involves women and sex trafficking as well. Then we have up next Thursday when we meet, the new Attorney General, who I assume will get out of committee and eventually be approved, but probably not with overwhelming vote, because there's a feeling, can she really change things from the way Holder has run the Justice Department and things of that nature. So, another thing that we promised to do in the last election, that we're going to do the third week of March, the second and third week of March, one week's for committee and the other one's for the Senate. Reed ran the Senate contrary to the 1974 budget law that says the Senate ought to pass a budget by April 15th every year. He never had, only 1 in 6 years, a budget debated in the United States Senate. So we are committed to doing, by the time it needs to be done, a budget through the Senate. Now, the House has always passed a budget, but not the House, not the Senate. So that'll be coming up in March. Then beyond that, it's kind of difficult for me to talk about, but if any of you are interested in the concept of patent trolling, I'll go into that, but won't say more than that. Legislation is high on the agenda. Juvenile justice reform, constitutional amendment requiring a balanced budget. That's out of my committee. For the whole Senate, if any of you are medical doctors, you get tired. Every year we have to update the Medicare formula for doctors. That's got to be done before March 31st. The highway bill runs out, I think, May 15th. That has to be reauthorized at that point, hopefully for a 6-year period of time. And then the whole issue of tracking terrorists through email and telephone, that runs out in June the 15th. And that has to be reauthorized. That's going to be a very controversial issue, since Snowden told all of our enemies everything that we were doing in that area, and it's become a very controversial issue here, and I can't really know exactly what direction that's going to take, but between my committee and the Intelligence Committee of the Senate, we're the main players in that area. Now, I probably haven't talked anything about the issues that you folks are interested in, so now there's an opportunity to ask me questions, but can I say about it, town meeting, why I come to Rotary clubs, it's the same thing I'd say if I was at your city hall and anybody would come, is I believe in the principle of representative government, that you have to have dialogue between those of us that are elected and the people we serve. So that's why I go around each of the 99 counties every year to do what I'm doing with you. And but that's not the only way to do it. So when you can't see me face to face, email me, postal mail me, phone in your issue, and if you leave your name and address, we'll answer you on paper, and follow me on my speeches and my press releases on grassley.senate.gov, and then Twitter and Facebook, and more recently Instagram. So those are how you can try to follow me. Those ladders are kind of one-way communication, but it gives you an opportunity to keep up stuff. So who wants to be first? Where, did I hear somebody? Yes.
Reauthorization of the workshop at time.
Yes.
Where are we at with
Yeah.
some reforms on that?
You're going to hear me say a lot of times I'm not a member of a committee, so I may not be able to give you a complete answer, but I think on this one I'll give you a pretty complete answer. Probably during the month of March, well, I can tell you what Senator Alexander said. He's chairman of the committee. He said that he wants to get one out this spring, so to me that's March or April. Probably won't be up on the Senate floor until May or June, but it would be pretty much a complete rewrite of No Child Left Behind. If I had to use one word to tell you how it's different, more flexibility for the states, less emphasis upon testing, maybe the same goals to be met, but more for states to determine how to meet those goals. Maybe that's all I can really get at. Is that enough?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. But if I could demonstrate, these are the bills of last year that I'm demonstrating. Now, I'm not really sure how it fits. But if there was a Democrat bill that was that thick last year, then Alexander had a bill that was about that thick. So you can see the difference. It's less how restrictive, I guess you'd say, the way Alexander wants to do it. And I think the House is going to be similar. I know he and I think the congressman's from Minnesota, the chairman of that committee, they're moving along kind of together. Not exactly the same place. Okay. Next question. Yes.
Yes, Senator Grassley, first of all, I appreciate your efforts to come to the grassroots level, I guess you call it, of your constituency, and got a point to make in that regard for your grassroots. Last July, one of our local CPAs here in town came to a Floyd County Farm Bureau meeting, Doug Cronloggy, for those of you who know all morning, and brought up the point of 1031 tax-free, some people call it, I think it's actually tax-deferred exchanges, that up to then and up to now has been unlimited. And he brought up the point that that's being debated to be taxed. So the long and the short of it was, the Farm Bureau policy meeting passed it. It went to the state, Iowa Farm Bureau Federation. They passed a resolution on it and forwarded it to American Farm Bureau, which just last month in January also passed a resolution in support of continuing the unlimited 1031 exemptions. What's your position on that if you see something arise in that arena?
I don't know of any abuse in that area, but except for correcting abuse, I'd leave it the same way it is. Now, I don't honestly know of any abuse, but I wouldn't want to say that with any laws we pass, there might not be some abuse, and I think I'd have a responsibility to correct abuse. But I think it's a very good tool, and probably wouldn't have any life at all, except that Camp was putting together a tax reform bill, and he ought to have some applause for coming up with a program, even though it had parts in it that I wouldn't like, and this was one of them. But that's where it got delayed to do it. In the end, it doesn't bring any new revenue. It just speeds up the revenue that would otherwise come in when that property is eventually sold. Okay, next question.
Senator, this alternative minimum tax, I understand it was put in years ago for the wealthy that they should at least pay a certain level of taxation. But it's gotten down where it's hitting more and more people. We can have a good year and a bad year on tax deductions. And that alternative minimum tax will come into play. And when half the country doesn't pay any taxes, it irritates me that those of us out here in the cornfields, when we're not in that wealthy class, that will hit us. And I don't think that's quite fair. Just because we've had a year maybe where we've had better deductions as opposed to the previous year when maybe they weren't as good. But is that being looked at?
Yeah, every year it gets looked at, and you can help me, Mr. Taxman, if I'm wrong on this. But let me give you the history of it. I think it goes back to 1969 when about 120 very wealthy people never paid a penny of tax. So that was put in there under the theory that everybody ought to pay a little bit of tax. Now it covers, I would bet, 4 or 5 million people. And it would probably cover 30 million people, except when this is the answer to your question, is that ever looked at? There's modifications of it from time to time so that you don't hit a whole bunch of new people. But that has been harmed by at least those 3 or 4 million people I'm talking about. Would you say, is there anything you can add to that?
I'm not a tax person.
Oh, I thought you said you were doing taxes.
No, I don't do taxes. I don't think
Oh.
Phil's here, is he? Well, there he is. He's the guy that can answer your question.
Well, we were talking about taxes there, and I got the idea you were a tax attorney.
No, I pay him, but I don't do them.
Okay, is that okay as far as answering?
Yeah, Dennis does mine, and I got hit last year, which surprised me.
There's more and more people getting.
It might be a higher number, but it's
They've adjusted that, haven't they, a couple times?
Oh, it
It
gets adjusted almost every year. Do you had your hand up saying?
Yeah, my question is, and this is a frustration that I have a little bit with my own party, which is the Republican Party, which is, we don't seem to be able to come to grips with the fact that there are a group of people in this country that we are not going to expel. I mean, I tend to think what Obama's did with his unilateral action was unconstitutional. But I think at some point we gotta recognize that there's a group of people, kids who were brought in, who've grown up and gone to our universities, people who've been here for 20 years working, that we're not going to send back to Mexico or Central America. And it frustrates me to not be able to come to grips with this problem, this immigration problem, because we're not even willing to concede that we've got a group of people here who are gonna be here and will stay. And if you're a Republican and you say anything about it, then you're immediately accused of amnesty. Well, we're gonna have amnesty of sorts, so why can't we accept that and move on to the discussion of how to secure our borders and have a meaningful system?
I think your answer is right up to the point of which comes first, the egg or the chicken. I think it's necessary to secure the border first before you deal with it.
Well, I agree with that.
Okay.
But then you can't even discuss the group that's gonna stay without being accused of amnesty, which I think is unfortunate.
That's why I hope to focus this year, as chairman of the committee that will deal with immigration, since we dealt with it 2 years ago, and the House didn't do anything with it, wait until the House passes some legislation before we do it, so we don't waste our time. And they will pass not one comprehensive piece of legislation like we did. They will pass several other bills, and the first one will be dealing with securing the border, and we'll work our way up to what you're talking about. Okay, next question. Yes, sir.
I've done bankruptcies in this town for about 4 years now, and all of my young couples, one's about under 35 or 40, over half their debt's usually student loan. A lot of times it has nothing to do with a lot of times they don't got a job anywhere close to what they got a degree in. Is there going to be any work on that at all about redefining what can be discharged for student loan interest, or for discharging bankruptcy student loan, but also more up your committee's thing? Is there any thought about changing the tax credit on interest for student loan this year?
Well, beyond the one that was permanent law 2 years ago, no.
Yeah. Okay.
Remember, that had to be renewed almost every year, and now it's permanent law. So it doesn't have to be renewed. And that's something I got put in 2001 when we had the tax bill of 2001. The answer is Senator Durbin has a bill in to do what you're asking. But I don't want to predict what will happen at this point. Yeah, Senator Durbin, the bill on. Yes, sir.
With the EPA shutting down all our coal industry, as far as generation of electricity and everything, where do you see our energy future?
I see it that if you, this really isn't answering your question, but I do want to answer your question. All of the above, that includes all the fossil fuels, all the alternative energy, all the conservation, all the nuclear. I think you have to have that for a long period of time before you get to anything that you rely just upon renewables. And I'm talking about probably 3 decades is what most people are estimating before renewables would be good enough that you could forget about coal. But in the meantime, this administration is committed to doing away with coal. And so it's going to be a real problem if we don't stop it. And so what is planned is probably in 2 areas. One, we have what we call a congressional veto, where Congress can override a regulation if you get 51 votes to do it, and it's not one of these things that has to have 60 votes. There's just a few things in the Senate don't have to have 60 votes, and this is one of them. So we know we can get, because we've tried this on other regulations in previous 4 years, where we only get 45 to 48 votes maybe at most. But we'll have enough votes, I think, to override the EPA rule on coal. And then the other one would be and that will pass the Senate, but if the president vetoes it, which he probably will, then we won't override the veto. So then the next best hope, or maybe even a better hope, but the next step would be things we use fairly frequently, probably things that are less controversial than what you're bringing up, but it's a rider on an appropriation bill, and it could be almost any area or almost any department and almost any regulation, because when we don't have continuing resolutions, we have about 11 or 12 different appropriation bills that cover most of the government. And we would, this rider would say something like, none of the money in this bill can be used to carry out regulations such and such. So that's where we're going to focus our attention, because the president, in the case of EPA, you know, there's a lot, you get in a lot of trouble if you shut down some government departments. But if you shut down the government EPA, at least in the near term, you're not going to get a lot of things. And the president is going to want to shut it down. So we think such a rider on EPA would very much stop that from year to year, at least until we get a new president.
So could that same strategy be used for the waters of the U.S.?
Yeah, it will be.
Super.
Yeah.
Question is cybersecurity. You're in charge of paying up the tax code. Hopefully there is a clause in there to make that more secure. A number of people have their income taxes hijacked, and that's caused an
Well,
issue. And
you
just
know,
what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that are to make sure that the present law is enforced, and what you're talking about is where the law has been violated by people within IRS. Because what you're talking about was done in the 1970s because Reagan used the IRS to go after his political enemies. So Congress passed what's called Section 6103, the privacy of income tax. So that what you asked me about can't happen. It isn't supposed to happen. But they have violated the law. And we've written to the Justice Department, who's being prosecuted. Well, evidently they aren't going to prosecute anybody in the IRS that did this, because it's too closely tied to the Lois Lerner affair. Or is that her name, Lois? Yeah, Lois Lerner. You know, the person that was going after all the conservative political organizations and wouldn't give them tax exempt status. It's kind of connected with that. So I'm not even sure. I didn't ask the question when we had the new Attorney General before our committee a 3 weeks ago, but she was asked that very question, what she was going to do about it, and I don't know whether we got an answer. If we did, I can't remember the answer. But it's an issue that's on the record there of what she said about it. Yes.
Senator, is any committee, maybe yours, looking at the Dodd-Frank law?
The bank.
And the restrictive covenants they put in there that don't just apply to the bankers, the mortgages, but to contracts for deed and people selling houses, et cetera. One restriction is you can't put in a balloon. After you have one, you can't do a second and a given. Very restrictive, and it is affecting the little guy.
I'll answer this and give you. I'm not on the committee, that's the Senate Banking Committee, and they're looking on a lot of things that are wrong with Dodd-Frank, but I don't know whether I can say that they're looking at that. But it's getting a good looking over.
What committee is it?
That's Senate Banking Committee. I'm on the Finance Committee, and the reason people get that mixed up with what you're talking about, because in the House of Representatives, the Banking Committee is not called the Banking Committee, it's called the House Financial Services Committee. And so that's why they think I deal with all the banking law.
We can write to them for a good.
Yeah.
I have a comment and a question.
Senator Shelby of Alabama is the chairman of the committee. Go ahead.
I have a comment and a question.
Sure.
Best wishes on streamlining the tax code. Best of luck.
Yeah, I'll tell you the answer that I have given to a lot of people why it's so difficult is we have legislated so many exemptions, and every exemption's got an economic interest, that everybody comes to my office says that we want tax reform, but.
Special interest groups. My question is, do you have an opinion on the future of the Affordable Care Act? And if you do, would you share that with us?
Well, first of all, I voted against it, so that's probably all I need to say about an opinion. But beyond the opinion, this was an issue in the last election, so we're going to go through the maneuvers of repealing it, which the president will veto, or we may not even get over a Democrat filibuster in the Senate, so at least the House bill is now in the Senate. It hasn't been brought up yet. It may never get to a final vote, but if it does, the president will veto it anyway. So then you got to focus on the second or third week of March and not a decision until January in the King versus Burwell case that's going to be argued. And it's over a very clear sentence within Obamacare that says something like this, that you can't have a subsidy for health insurance for residents of any state where there is a federal exchange instead of a state exchange. Well, there's 37 states that didn't set up an exchange, so the federal government exchange is operating there. So the law says they can't get the subsidy like in the other 13 states. And that was the way the president intended it, because he wanted to put pressure on the states to set up their own exchange, so the federal government would not be running the whole thing. And so they shouldn't be getting the subsidy, but 2 years ago, the president looked at it and said, well, I can just say that they get the subsidy. So they're getting the subsidy contrary to law, like 37 other things that the president has changed within Obamacare that probably a good share of them he didn't have the legislative authority to do. Like when he changed from January 2014 to January 2015, when the employer mandate would go into effect. Even Senator Harkin was quoted in the paper saying, well, the law says it goes into effect January 1st, how can he change it? Well, he probably can't, and he'd get thrown out of the courts, but this is the same thing. And so we think the court's going to rule that out. That throws out the individual mandate, the employer mandate. We think that's enough to bring the president to the table and negotiate some changes in Obamacare. Okay.
One last question.
He didn't say one last one. Well, he's on my staff and he's got to keep me on time.
Take all the time you want, sir. Residential renewable energy tax credits are set to expire after 2016, such as a 30% tax credit for solar or geothermal, also qualifying systems with wind. Do you have any insight as to what direction that may go for extension after 2016?
Yeah. Probably be continued unless we move along on tax reform. Now what you're quoting from was part of about 50 to 60 tax credits for various things, including, the R&D tax credit for big corporations, or you can talk about 179 for small business expensing their depreciation, or the biodiesel tax credit. There's about 50 or 60 of those that expire every year or 2 years and have to be renewed. It happens when this one came up on solar, it was renewed for 4 years. So it hasn't, you haven't had this stopgap that biodiesel and wind and Section 179 and all the problems that causes business people to take advantage of. So since that would have to come up probably this year for renewal along with the other 50 some that we renewed just before Christmas, which didn't do much good for 179, as you can probably tell. But anyway, it'll be brought up at that time. Now, this is a either-or situation. If we get deeply into tax reform, then I don't think it's going to be decided very early in the year. But if there's a feeling we can't do massive tax reform, then we'll probably go back to these 50 or 60 things and then it'll get reauthorized. Well, listen, I appreciate very much your hospitality, and I want to encourage you to write to me and email me when you can't see me face to face. Thank you all very much.
Thank you to all our guests for attending today and to all of our members who continue to make this better. We are here.